My name is Emma Reynolds. I'm 30 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed that dedication and hard work would be enough to earn my family's respect. How wrong I was. I grew up watching my father, James Reynolds, build a luxury resort empire from scratch. From the age of 16, I spent my weekends and holidays learning every aspect of the business. Emma, this business requires sacrifices, my father would repeat, as I canceled plans with friends to review contracts late into the night. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Olivia, now 26, lived as if the world was her personal playground. Your sister is young. Let her enjoy life. She'll mature eventually, my mother, Victoria, would always say with an indulgent smile. But Olivia never matured. At 26, she was still living in the family mansion, with no real job beyond her social media posts, where she presented herself as a luxury lifestyle influencer, using our resorts as backdrops. I divided my time managing 3 of our most profitable resorts, working an average of 14 hours a day. My downtown penthouse apartment was more a place to sleep than a home. I rarely spent enough time there to appreciate the panoramic view I'd paid a fortune for. But it was my space, earned with my own salary after years of saving, and it represented my independence in a family where I always felt like an outsider. Everything began to change when Nathan arrived. Hired as our new financial director, he had an acumen for numbers that was impressive, and an integrity I soon discovered was rare in our family circle. In the first weeks, I noticed how he frowned while reviewing old financial reports, until, one afternoon, he knocked on my office door with an expression I'll never forget. "Emma," he said, closing the door and lowering his voice, "I've found serious discrepancies in the financial reports from the last 5 years. Your sister has spent approximately $3.5 million on personal expenses, all categorized as experiential marketing." My world collapsed. $3.5 million. The equivalent of the initial investment for 2 new mid-sized resorts. Money that could have created hundreds of jobs. "Show me everything," I replied, feeling a knot in my stomach that signaled the beginning of the end of my naivety. What Nathan revealed to me in the following weeks wasn't just a pattern of excessive spending, but my parents' complete complicity. Each of Olivia's extravagances, private jets, yacht parties, entire wardrobes of luxury brands, all approved and categorized to appear as legitimate business investments. I had dedicated my life to this company, sacrificed relationships, health, and youth, only to discover that I was the only Reynolds who truly cared about the legacy my father had built. The discovery was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, Nathan and I spent nights investigating every suspicious transaction. We created a makeshift office in my apartment, away from curious eyes at corporate headquarters. Walls covered with documents, financial reports, and timelines revealing years of systematic financial manipulation. "Look at this." Nathan pointed to a particularly large transaction. $200,000 for a strategic planning retreat in Bali. Coincidentally, the same week your sister posted photos from a private villa there with 10 of her friends. With each new discovery, I felt a toxic mixture of betrayal and anger growing inside me. Why would they do this? We're profitable. We don't need to divert money. It's not about need, Nathan explained gently. It's about privilege and entitlement. For them, the line between personal and company assets never really existed. I confronted my father on a Thursday morning. I chose his private office, away from employees' ears. I placed the documents on the mahogany desk and waited for his explanation. "Emma, you need to understand how the real business world works," he said with that patronizing voice he always used when he wanted to make me feel naive. "Your sister is building a personal brand that benefits our resorts. Every post she makes brings visibility we can't buy with traditional advertising." "And the $3.5 million is just the cost of marketing?" I asked, trying to contain my sarcasm. "Exactly," he smiled, as if proud of my understanding. "You take care of the numbers, she takes care of the image, each contributing in your own way." I left that office with painful clarity. My father would never see me as anything more than a competent manager, a useful piece on his chessboard. Olivia would always be the favorite, regardless of her actual contributions. The following week, I noticed subtle changes in the office dynamic. Meetings rescheduled without my knowledge. Conversations that ceased when I entered rooms. Staff casting pitying glances in my direction. Nathan confirmed my suspicions on a Friday night. He burst into my apartment unannounced, holding a folder and wearing a grave expression. "I found this at the printer," he said, handing me a document. "It's a draft for the next board meeting. They're planning to vote you out while you're in Singapore next week." The document detailed an executive restructuring necessary for the company's new growth phase. My position would be eliminated, and a new role would be created in its place, to be filled by a strategic marketing consultant with contemporary experience in digital media. "They're giving your position to Olivia," Nathan translated the obvious. "But they can't remove me like that," I argued. "I have a contract. I'm a senior executive." Nathan's look mixed compassion and seriousness. "Emma, your family controls the board. Technically, they can do whatever they want." That's when it really sank in. It wasn't just about money or position. It was about family loyalty and how to my parents I was dispensable. "What do I do now?" I asked, more to myself than to Nathan. He hesitated for a moment, then took my hand. The gesture surprised me. We had kept our relationship strictly professional until then. "You have options," he said. "But first, you need to decide what you really want. To fight for your place in this company, or to create something new, something entirely your own." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my penthouse balcony, watching the city lights and rethinking every moment of the past 15 years. Every missed party, every relationship that never blossomed, every extra hour dedicated to a company that now planned to discard me. The truth hit me like a wave. I no longer wanted to be part of it. I no longer wanted to fight for crumbs of recognition or beg for a place at the table. I wanted to build my own table. My trip to Singapore was scheduled for Monday. My family's plan was simple. While I was on the other side of the world closing our new partnership with Asian investors, they would hold the board meeting to remove me. I would return to find my desk emptied and a consultative role as consolation. I decided not to make things easy for them. "I'll need the complete company and corporation documents," I told Nathan on Sunday night, as we reviewed our strategy in my apartment. "I want to understand exactly what my legal rights are." "I'm already 2 steps ahead," he replied, opening his folder. "And I found something interesting. Do you know who Eliza Reynolds is?" I frowned. "My grandmother. She died when I was 12. "Well, the company was initially registered in her name," Nathan explained, showing me yellowed documents I had never seen. "When your father took over, there was a restructuring, and guess who she left 22% of the shares to in her will?" My heart raced. "To me?" Nathan nodded. "Your father controls 35%, your mother 18%, and Olivia received 15% when she turned 21. With your 22%, plus the 10% you bought with your bonus 5 years ago, I have 32%, I completed, beginning to understand the importance of that discovery. "It's not a majority, but it's enough to block important decisions that require 2/3 approval," Nathan continued. "Like, for example, executive restructurings." A strange sensation took hold of me. It wasn't exactly hope, but something akin to power. For the first time, I realized I had options beyond simply accepting whatever my family decided. "They never told me about these shares," I murmured. "And I bet they've been signing documents in your name for years," Nathan added. "I'm almost certain that constitutes fraud." We spent the entire night devising a plan. I wouldn't go to Singapore. Instead, I would call my own extraordinary board meeting for the same time they planned to oust me. On Monday, at 9 a.m., I walked into the main conference room of our flagship resort. My father looked up from his documents, clearly surprised. "Emma, I thought you were on the flight to Singapore." "Change of plans," I replied casually, placing my folder on the table. "I thought I should be present for today's board meeting." His face paled slightly. "There's no meeting scheduled for today." "Strange," I retorted, pulling out a document from my folder. "Because I have here a signed notice to discuss an executive restructuring, and as a shareholder with 32% of the company, I decided to attend." My mother, who had just entered the room with Olivia, froze at the door. "What are you talking about, darling?" "I'm talking about the shares I inherited from Grandma Eliza," I replied calmly. "The same ones you never mentioned, and whose dividends have been directed to an account I don't control for the past 18 years. The expression of shock on my father's face was priceless. For the first time in my life, I saw James Reynolds at a loss for words. Olivia stepped forward, her face contorted with anger. "You're bluffing. Dad would never let you have that much power in the company." "It wasn't his choice," I responded. "And I'm not here to fight. I'm here to negotiate." At that moment, Nathan entered the room accompanied by a woman in an impeccable suit whom I had never seen before. "This is Sandra Chen," I introduced, attorney specializing in corporate law. "She'll be mediating our conversation today." The rest of the meeting was tense. My father tried to argue that everything had been done for the good of the company. My mother oscillated between manipulative tears and accusations of ingratitude. Olivia simply glared at me as if I had committed the worst betrayal. When everyone calmed down, I put my proposal on the table. "I want out," I announced. "Not in the way you planned, but on my terms. I'll sell my shares at their fair market value, plus compensation for dividends withheld over the years. In exchange, I'll sign a limited non-compete agreement that will allow me to start my own business, as long as it's not in the exact same segment or locations as Reynolds Resorts." My father laughed, but there was no humor in his voice. "And where do you think the money for this own business will come from?" "From the $32 million my shares are worth," I responded calmly, "plus the approximately $7 million in unpaid dividends, with interest." The silence that followed was deafening. The negotiations lasted 2 exhausting weeks. My father tried every tactic, from legal threats to appealing to my sense of family loyalty. My mother alternated between inconsolable crying and accusing me of destroying the family. Olivia simply stopped speaking to me, blocking me on all her social media as if we were teenagers. "Your proposal is absurd," my father insisted during the endless meetings with lawyers. "The company doesn't have that kind of liquidity." "Then sell properties? Or find investors?" I replied with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "Or we can take this all to court, including the tax fraud and misappropriation of my dividends." Finally, on a cold Friday afternoon, we signed the agreement. I would receive $28 million for my shares, less than their real value, but enough, and $5 million for the withheld dividends. In exchange, I would sign a non-compete agreement prohibiting me from opening luxury resorts in the same cities where Reynolds Luxury Resorts operated for 3 years. The day I received the transfer, I felt a strange mixture of freedom and vertigo. I was officially unemployed for the first time since I was 16. No schedule, no corporate responsibilities, no professional identity. "What now?" Nathan asked one night as we dined on my terrace. Throughout the entire process, our relationship had evolved from colleagues to confidants, and finally to something deeper that we still didn't dare to name. "Now we create something new," I replied, showing him preliminary sketches I had been scribbling for weeks. My idea wasn't to directly compete with traditional luxury resorts like my family's. Instead, I envisioned a chain of boutique hotels focused on sustainability, cultural integration, and authentic experiences. Hotels where luxury wasn't defined by crystal chandeliers and Egyptian cotton sheets, but by spaces that respected the natural environment, supported local communities, and offered guests genuine connections with the places they visited. The following 6 months were a roller coaster. I rented a space in a modern office building, far from the Reynolds corporate tower. I hired a small team of professionals, many of them former employees of my family who had been underestimated or ignored, like me. Nathan resigned from his position as financial director to join my venture, bringing with him a prudent financial vision that complemented my creative ambition. I called my new company Authentic Stays, a name that reflected everything I wanted to create. Our first target, a small hotel on an unexplored Portuguese coast, where construction would preserve the natural cliffs rather than dominate them. It wasn't easy. Despite my experience in the industry, many suppliers and potential collaborators were wary of working with someone who had rebelled against the Reynolds name. Some banks hesitated to finance additional projects, fearful of retaliation from my father, whose influence in the sector was legendary. On a particularly difficult Tuesday, after our main contractor in Portugal suddenly withdrew from the project, I had my first crisis of confidence. I broke down in my office, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe I should have accepted the consultative role, I confessed to Nathan through tears. At least I would have had security. He looked at me with a mixture of tenderness and firmness that I had come to value enormously. "Emma, do you remember why we started this? To prove them wrong," I replied automatically. "No," he said softly. "We started this because you have a vision of what hospitality should be, a vision worth building, regardless of your family." His words resonated deeply. I realized I had been so focused on escaping the past that I almost lost sight of my own future. Authentic Stays couldn't just be a reaction to Reynolds Luxury Resorts. It had to be its own entity, with its own identity. That night, I redesigned our business plan. Instead of trying to grow quickly to compete with my former family company, we would focus on making each property exceptional. Quality over quantity, authenticity over ostentation. 2 months later, I received an unexpected call from Sandra Chen, the attorney who had mediated my exit. "Emma, there's something you should know," she said without preamble. "Reynolds Luxury Resorts is in trouble. They've lost 3 important contracts in Asia, and the numbers from the last quarter are concerning." I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a pang of sadness for the employees I had left behind, people who had been kind to me and who now faced an uncertain future. "How is Olivia handling the situation?" I asked. "That's part of the problem," Sandra replied. "According to my sources, she barely shows up at the office. She's more concerned with maintaining appearances on Instagram than saving the company." I hung up feeling strangely liberated. It was no longer my responsibility to fix the family company's problems. I had my own path now, one I had consciously chosen. That night, as Nathan and I reviewed the final plans for our first hotel, a warm certainty washed over me. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that truly reflected my values, not my father's or my surname's. "This is going to work, isn't it?" I asked Nathan, not out of insecurity, but for the pleasure of hearing him confirm it. "It's already working," he replied, kissing my hand. "We're creating something authentic, just like the name says." 1 year after launching Authentic Stays, our first hotel in Portugal wasn't just operational, it had exceeded all expectations. Reviews praised our attention to detail, our commitment to sustainability, and above all, the authentic atmosphere we had managed to create. Reservations for the high season were selling out 6 months in advance. The second hotel, located on a small island in Thailand, was weeks away from its grand opening. The third, in the mountains of Chile, had just broken ground. My vision was beginning to materialize, not as a replica of my father's empire, but as something completely new, something genuinely mine. Then, on a Tuesday morning, while reviewing plans with my design team, I received a call that would change everything. "Emma Reynolds?" The voice on the other end sounded formal, professional. "Yes, speaking. My name is Michael Thornton. I'm the principal financial advisor for Reynolds Luxury Resorts. I was wondering if we could meet. It's an urgent matter related to your family." My first instinct was to decline the offer. I had built careful walls between my new life and my past, but something in his tone stopped me. "What kind of urgent matter?" "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Would it be possible to meet today?" That afternoon, I met him in a discreet cafe far from both corporate offices. Michael Thornton turned out to be a man in his 50s, with tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "I appreciate you agreeing to see me," he began. "What I have to tell you isn't easy. Reynolds Luxury Resorts is on the verge of bankruptcy. Despite the warning signs I had received months earlier, the news hit me like a physical punch. How is that possible? When I left, we had solid bookings for 3 years, contracts with international tour operators, lines of credit, all that has changed," he explained, sliding a folder toward me. "Your sister has proven to be less competent than your parents anticipated. She's canceled key contracts to prioritize partnerships with influencer friends, carried out unnecessary and costly renovations, and expanded the payroll with positions created specifically for her social circle." I reviewed the documents, feeling a mixture of horror and vindication. The financial projections showed that without drastic intervention, the company my father founded would go bankrupt in less than 6 months. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "I'm no longer part of the company." Michael leaned forward. "Because your parents are considering selling, and the most interested buyer is Vanguard Hospitality." My stomach contracted. Vanguard was known in the industry for acquiring struggling hotels, firing 80% of the staff, and converting historic properties into generic high-yield developments. "They would destroy everything my father built," I murmured. "Exactly." Michael nodded. "That's why I'm here. Not officially, of course. Your father would kill me if he knew I'd come. But I've been working for this company for 20 years. I can't just stand by and watch." An hour later, I was in Nathan's office, pacing back and forth as I processed the information. "It's not your problem, Emma," he said gently. "Your family made their choices." "I know," I replied, But there are hundreds of innocent employees who will lose their jobs if Vanguard takes over. People who were kind to me, who taught me, who supported me for years. The dilemma tormented me for days. Should I stand aside and watch as the family legacy crumbled? Or should I intervene, risking not only my new business but also the inner peace that had cost me so much to achieve? Finally, I made a decision. I convened my executive team and presented them with a bold proposal. Authentic Stays would buy Reynolds Luxury Resorts. "It's crazy," said Jamie, our operations director. "We're just starting out. We don't have the capacity to absorb a chain of that size. Not to mention," added Nathan, "we don't have the capital. Even with our investors, we're far from the market price. That's why I'm proposing a structured acquisition," I explained, showing them the plan I had been developing during sleepless nights. "We buy the most vulnerable properties first to prevent them from falling into Vanguard's hands, and gradually integrate the rest under our management." After hours of debate, the team agreed to at least explore the idea. Nathan and I prepared a formal proposal and requested a meeting with my father. The day of the meeting, the knot in my stomach was almost paralyzing. I hadn't seen my parents since signing the separation agreement. I hadn't spoken to Olivia in over a year. The lobby of the Reynolds Plaza Hotel, the company's flagship, felt painfully familiar. I had grown up running through these hallways, had memorized every corner. As the elevator rose toward the boardroom on the top floor, I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The door opened, and there they were. My father, visibly aged, my mother, with a tense smile, and Olivia, who didn't even look up when I entered. "Emma?" my father said, his voice lacking the confidence that had always been his trademark. "I understand you have a proposal for us." I took a seat across from them, placed my folder on the table, and with a voice firmer than I felt, I said, "I haven't come to mock your problems or seek revenge. I've come to offer a solution that could save this family's legacy." The room fell silent as I presented my proposal. It was ambitious, but realistic. Authentic Stays would acquire Reynolds Luxury Resorts in phases, beginning with the most vulnerable properties. We would maintain the brands separate. Reynolds would continue with its traditional luxury approach, while Authentic Stays would follow its own innovative path. Employees would retain their positions under a carefully planned restructuring. "The price you're offering is ridiculous," my father snapped when I finished the presentation. "These properties are worth at least twice as much." "Perhaps they were before Olivia took control," I replied, keeping my voice neutral as I slid toward him the financial reports Michael had provided me. "But according to these figures, in 6 months, they won't be worth anything." My mother intervened, her voice trembling but determined. "Emma, darling, I understand you want to help, but perhaps we could consider other options. Vanguard has made a very generous offer." "Generous?" I couldn't hide the tone of disbelief. "Vanguard will fire 80% of the staff as soon as they sign the papers. They'll sell the art pieces you've collected over decades. They'll turn these hotels into generic boxes with aggressive marketing." Olivia finally looked up from her phone. Her eyes reflected a mixture of anger and shame I had never seen in her. "And what would you do differently?" she asked tensely. "Come to rescue us like the perfect heroine. Prove that you were always right?" I took a deep breath before answering. This wasn't the time for old rivalries. This isn't about being right, Olivia. It's about preserving something valuable. These hotels are special. The people who work in them are special. They deserve a chance. My father abruptly stood up and walked to the window. From there, he contemplated the city's skyline for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older than I remembered. What role would we have in this new structure? It was the question I had anticipated, but one I still found difficult to answer. "You would be emeritus president, Dad. An advisory role, without daily operational responsibilities, but with a voice in important strategic decisions." I turned to my mother. "Mom, you would continue overseeing the art collections and cultural programs that have always been your passion." Both nodded slowly, processing the information. Then I looked at Olivia. "And you, Olivia, could continue being the public face of the Reynolds brand, focusing on what you do best, creating visually impactful experiences and sharing them with the world. But you would have a team that would handle the financial and operational aspects." Her expression softened slightly, though distrust remained in her eyes. "And who would run all this?" "You." I shook my head. "We would have an external CEO, someone respected in the industry with no previous connections to either of our companies." I would remain primarily focused on authentic stays. My father sat back down, rubbing his temples as he used to do when facing difficult decisions. "And if we reject your offer, then I wish you the best of luck with Vanguard," I replied sincerely, "and I'll be here to hire any of your employees who lose their jobs." Negotiations continued for weeks. There were moments of tension, tears, and even some unexpected laughter. Shared memories emerged amid discussions about valuations and contractual terms. Gradually, the walls I had built began to crack, not enough to forget the past, but enough to glimpse a different future. Finally, a month after my initial proposal, we signed the agreement. Authentic Stays would acquire Reynolds Luxury Resorts in 3 phases over the next 2 years. The transition would begin immediately. The day we announced the merger to employees, I stood beside my father in the main hall of the Reynolds Plaza Hotel. It was the first time we had appeared publicly as allies in more than a year. The tension was palpable, but there was also a curious sense of closure. "I want you to know," my father said to the gathered staff, "that this company will remain in Reynolds family hands. My daughter Emma," he paused, his voice breaking slightly, "has found a way to preserve what we've built together and carry it into the future." As I observed the relieved faces among the employees, many of whom had feared for their jobs for months, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the ending I had imagined when I angrily left the family empire, but perhaps it was better. That night, Nathan and I celebrated with a quiet dinner on my terrace. The night sky seemed especially bright. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, pouring me a glass of champagne. "It's an enormous responsibility." "I'm not sure of anything," I answered honestly, "but I know I couldn't stand by and watch while everything crumbled." "That's what I've always liked about you," he said with a smile. "Your inability to give up, even when it would be the easiest thing to do." We toasted under the stars, not to victory or revenge, but to something more complex and satisfying. The opportunity to rebuild, not just a business, but perhaps with time also a family. 5 years have passed since that night on my terrace. 5 years of transformation, not just for the businesses I now lead, but for myself. The Reynolds Authentic Group, as we finally decided to call it after months of debate about branding, has become a singular force in the global hotel industry. We maintain 2 distinct but complementary lines. Reynolds Hotels continue to offer their traditional luxury, though now with integrated sustainable practices, while Authentic Stays has expanded to 12 properties across 4 continents, each centered on immersive and authentic experiences. This morning, as I walk through the lobby of our new hotel in Kyoto, I pause in front of a framed photograph. My grandmother Eliza, standing in front of the first Reynolds Hotel in 1972. Her eyes shine with the same determination I now recognize in my own reflection. It was her vision that started it all, though for decades her contribution was eclipsed in the family narrative. "Your grandmother would be proud," says a familiar voice behind me. I turn to find my father, now officially retired, though he still regularly appears at our properties, unable to keep completely away from the business that defined his life. "I hope so," I reply, as we walk together toward the conference room where the staff waits for the official inauguration. Our relationship has evolved into something I never would have imagined possible. It's not perfect. There are still moments of tension, disagreements about business decisions, and occasionally old wounds resurface. But there is also a mutual respect that was previously missing, an acknowledgement of our respective strengths and weaknesses. My mother has flourished in her role as the group's cultural programs director. Freed from the pressures of being the CEO's wife, she has developed innovative artistic initiatives that have transformed our hotels into cultural centers in the communities where we operate. And Olivia, perhaps she represents the biggest surprise. Initially skeptical and resentful of the changes, she gradually found her authentic place in the company. Her instinct for visual and experiential trends, properly channeled and backed by competent professionals, has proven to be an invaluable asset. She has helped us communicate our brand in a way that resonates with a new generation of travelers. Our relationship remains complicated, marked by years of competition and resentment, but we are learning, slowly, to be sisters as well as colleagues. "The Singapore team sent the first quarter numbers," my father comments as we approach the conference room. "Impressive work, Emma." I smile, appreciating the compliment. There was a time when I would have desperately craved his approval. Now, it's nice to receive it, but I no longer need it to validate my decisions. As we enter the room, I see Nathan chatting animatedly with our local team. After 3 years of marriage, his presence still gives me the same feeling of warmth I felt that night in my office when he showed me the documents that would change our lives. As the group's financial director, he has implemented structures that balance ambition with financial sustainability, ensuring we never approach the precipice that almost destroyed Reynolds. I take my place at the podium, observing the expectant faces before me. Reynolds veterans who survived the crisis, new talents attracted by Authentic Stay's vision, and the brilliant Japanese team that has worked tirelessly to make this Kyoto property a reality. Welcome to the new Kyoto Authentic Reynolds, I begin. This hotel represents everything we've learned on our journey. It honors traditions while embracing innovation. It respects the past while looking to the future. It unites the best of two visions that once seemed incompatible. As I speak these words, I realize I'm not just talking about the hotel, but about my own life, about the painful but necessary process of separation that allowed me to find my voice, then return and rebuild something stronger and more authentic. After the ceremony, I briefly escape to the top-floor terrace. The sun sets over Kyoto's ancient temples, creating a hypnotic contrast with the modern buildings on the horizon. Nathan finds me there, handing me a cup of green tea. Thoughtful? He asks, already knowing the answer. Remembering, I reply. 5 years ago, I was so certain that the only way to find myself was by cutting all ties with my family and their legacy. And you were right, in a way, he says, leaning on the railing beside me. You needed that break to discover who you were outside their shadow. I nod, thinking about the path traveled. You know what's most surprising? That in the end, it wasn't about choosing between being a Reynolds or being myself. It was about redefining what it meant to be a Reynolds, on my own terms. The sky turns purple as we contemplate the city. In a few hours, we'll return to our lives of meetings, strategic decisions, and the constant balance between work and personal life. We have plans to expand to South America next year, and I'm considering a mentorship program for young women in the hospitality industry. But for now, in this perfect moment suspended between day and night, I feel a deep gratitude for everything. Even for the painful turning point that forced me to abandon security and claim my own power. We are not the sum of what we inherit, I murmur, remembering something my grandmother wrote in a journal I found after all the chaos. We are what we choose to build with that inheritance. Nathan intertwines his fingers with mine as the first stars appear in the Kyoto sky. And you've built something extraordinary, Emma Reynolds. For the first time in my life, I can say I completely agree.